Good afternoon, everyone. Josh is Severe Weather, and happy Saturday to you. I am a meteorologist in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to get right to it. We've got a dangerous situation setting up for Florida as a storm is quickly forming here in the Western Gulf and expected to strengthen. Now, a few days ago, I didn't think this was going to get up to hurricane intensity, but it is forming a lot faster, at least 2 days quicker than schedule, and in a very favorable position here in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico, which is a taproot for storms this time of year to form and form quickly. So my current forecast brings us to hurricane strength here in the next 36 to 48 hours as maybe a major hurricane and continuing to intensify now with a lot of our reliable hurricane forecast models showing a major hurricane and several showing Category 4 with a little bit of weakening as it makes its final approach to Florida here later on Wednesday. Now, you'll see my area of red here shows that there's still going to be some uncertainty. The storm is just beginning to form and forecast models are just beginning to run on a formed storm. We don't even have the aircraft in there yet as they were caught off guard with how quickly the system is formed. However, a strong agreement in our forecast models here with an uptrend today and one that is very concerning for Florida. And this includes Tampa Bay, but it also includes Southwest Florida, Central Florida, maybe even parts of the Big Bend before all is said and done with the storm moving quickly. Now, yesterday, because the storm hadn't formed, the rainfall forecast was very high, especially for South Florida, because of how stretched out and how slow the motion was going to be. With a stronger storm, we are likely to see this moving more quickly, which is good and bad. It's better from a rainfall perspective, but very bad from a wind and storm perspective. And right now, with our model guidance clustering close to Tampa Bay, this very well could be one of the worst Tampa Bay storms of all time if this forecast holds, and that is a big if at this point. I apologize for scaring and putting the fear of God into people, but I would rather you be prepared for the worst at this point with this storm being about 4 to 5 days away. So you'll see my forecast from a week ago on the 29th of September. I alerted folks to this potential threat. And again, it's obviously speculation that far away, but models have been picking up on this happening for a while. They've just now starting to agree on details. So this is Tropical Depression 14, expected to become Tropical Storm Milton here later today. We do have two hurricanes that are not a threat to land, Leslie and Kirk, which is starting to weaken now as a major hurricane. And we've got another area in the eastern Atlantic that I'm not super concerned with for the time being. It is not going to be a threat to land. Take a look at this. This is our tropical depression already forming a pretty well-defined center here, already getting to go together here very well in the Western Gulf. This is the same place where Hurricane Francine formed about 4 weeks ago as it interacted with a boundary, almost exactly the same setup. The difference here is that the steering takes it in this direction and not up into this direction. And that is because we're getting later into the season where the jet stream drops farther south and pushes things along farther to the east. So that is what we're going to be watching closely here. This is the remains of Helene east of Bermuda, not producing any thunderstorm activity, not going to reform. This is Category 3 Hurricane Kirk, which is starting to weaken now, but still a large storm, which is going to turn away and eventually head towards Western Europe here next week. And we've got now Hurricane Leslie, which is getting wind shear from Kirk, so it will not be a major hurricane at this point. At least I don't expect it to be because of the effects from Kirk. Here's a closer view of the Gulf of Mexico, and boy, how things have changed here in the last 24 hours. There's actually still a little bit of a low pressure center in here. This is what models originally were developing about a week ago and pulling it up in this direction. But this is no longer going to be anything but just another piece of energy that gets sucked into this larger system. This system is a product of very favorable warm water temperatures over the southwestern Gulf. Also a tropical depression that came out of our gyre and crossed, and it died, but has now come back to life. And the product of a boundary that's here. There's a cold front here that's stalled and actually providing an increase in what we call convergence, where air masses come together. All of these are very favorable. So this system here we don't have to stress about. In fact, because instead of a big sloppy core like we saw on the models a couple of days ago, we now have the core over here. That is the system that we're going to be tracking, and it is expected to generally head over the southwest Gulf and then move into a very favorable environment to strengthen and some spread by the time it gets up to Florida. But anybody in this window obviously needs to be watching as this storm is likely to grow. I don't think it's going to be as big as Helene right now due to the upper level environment not being quite as ideal for it, but a smaller storm like this can certainly still intensify very quickly. We've seen that happen many times. So I think we're going to have Milton this afternoon. This is where it's centered right now. I believe Tampico is about here in Mexico, and our center is underneath this canopy here, and already some pretty good outflow. There's a slight amount of wind shear down below the system here, a little bit of outflow in this direction, but honestly, this is the pipeline for where storms are going to form this time of the year and strengthen the fastest if we're in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not going to be in the northeastern Gulf, not going to be in the northwestern Gulf. So this is a very favorable spot for this to develop. And if we take a look here at the surroundings here, just want to kind of go through a little bit of meteorology. You can see here that the inflow is already looking pretty good with this system. It's got enough space away from land to now strengthen pretty significantly. It may not do it rapidly today, but I think tomorrow is the day when we're going to know exactly what we're facing here in Florida. So yeah, definitely healthy looking. I just hate having to even talk about this being a potential disaster storm, but you know, I would rather everybody be prepared at this point, and maybe we're going to get lucky at the end and it doesn't get as strong, but I would not count on that happening. I would rather folks be prepared for the worst at this point. Here's a look at the water vapor, which shows you what's going on in the Gulf here real quick. And you can see there's a large area of high pressure aloft over here. There's a trough that's moving through here. That's why we've got the southwesterly flow. And there's a boundary that is stretched in this area that's the focus for some stronger wind shear. But south of the boundary, down in this area, we actually have pretty low wind shear, so we cannot use that as an excuse for why this system is not going to form. It's actually going to be tucked into an area here that's got some pretty good potential for this system to strengthen pretty quickly. So let's talk about the track here. You can see it is expected to be a tropical storm by this evening, and then it's going to make a right turn and begin to speed up here on Sunday. And the official forecast calls for this to become a hurricane before you wake up Monday morning, for most of you wake up. After that, it may come close to the Yucatan, or it may go over a very favorable spot here in the Gulf where Helene crossed a few weeks ago. And despite Helene being such a big storm that ate up a lot of the hot ocean water, I warned you all ahead of the season here that the ocean water supports multiple storms. You know, this definitely has a lot of potential. And you can see the official track now takes the storm onshore sometime on Wednesday near Longboat Key and Bradenton across, I believe it's Manatee County here, just south of the bay. But it's very possible within this that we could see this come north or south of this track. There's still some spread until the storm really gets going. I would certainly prepare for the worst up in here, but also certainly not write it out down in here across southwest Florida. For Tampa Bay, the worst possible track, and I'll show it to you because some of the models are showing it, would be a storm that hits in this direction, hitting Pinellas County directly and driving the water right up the bay into Tampa proper. And that is a possibility. I mean, we've had storm surge already with Helene, and this one coming closer just makes things worse. So officially, the Hurricane Center is calling this a high-end Category 2 storm. In my opinion, that's not high enough, and I'm going to show you reliable guidance that backs that claim up. You're going to see here tomorrow, it's going to go over some high ocean heat content. Then it's going to go over the warm loop current of the Gulf of Mexico here by the time we get to Monday night. And as it passes over this, it's got some good potential to strengthen across this area. It may weaken a little bit as it's making its final approach, but because it is actually moving a little faster at that point, see how the dots get farther apart from each other, it's going to have less time to weaken. And this is something, if you're inland across Florida, you need to watch pretty closely as well. That includes Orlando and Lakeland and the Space Coast, and potentially farther south or farther north. I think the Big Bend is about as far north as this is going to potentially get, but I think more than likely it stays south of Steinhatchee and maybe takes a run at the Citrus Coast, but more likely the Bay Area or southwestern Florida in here, all the way down to perhaps Sanibel, Fort Myers, and maybe even Bonita Springs. You can see the ocean heat content here is still ripping high, and this is the time of year when storms in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean can often be at their strongest. Even though it's October, it is certainly that time of year. The National Hurricane Center doesn't ignore the threat that this is going to be a stronger storm. Just because it's going out with a high-end Category 2 does not mean it's going to climb. We saw that during Helene. We saw that during Beryl. Sometimes they just don't want to go all the way to the top yet. They want to give it a little bit of time to form, and I respect that. but it doesn't help us either when the storm is just a few days away. So their official text says that it is in a favorable environment of low wind shear, warm sea surface temps, and these are going to allow it to strengthen over the next few days. Maybe not quickly for the next 24 hours until that inner core gets established. But you know what? Looking at that satellite, we're not far from that happening. But then we likely are going to see some faster strengthening tomorrow, and especially tomorrow night and Monday. And all the global models are showing that significant deepening now. They started showing it yesterday afternoon. I wasn't ready to jump on it just yet, but now the storm is formed. They know that it's there and it's got that look. So the Hurricane Center is expecting rapid strengthening at that point as it moves into the central and eastern Gulf. The Hurricane Center is showing rapid intensification after 36 hours, so beginning tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening. And the official forecast shows it near major hurricane strength when it gets into the central and eastern Gulf. This forecast is near the intensity aids, but some upward adjustment may be required as it lies a little bit below those regional hurricane models, and those are the ones showing Category 3 and 4. But regardless, and I think this is what a lot of you forget, the fact that this is a big system and strengthening, if we focus on if it's a 2 or a 3, we're going to lose a lot of the detail that goes with the impacts that the storm can have. I really hope you learned that with Helene, but I think with this one, again, we are likely to see an intense storm with multiple life-threatening hazards affecting the West Coast. This is the very first advisory. We don't even have a plane in there yet, and the Hurricane Center is already promising this to be a major storm, unfortunately. So heavy rain is going to be a problem. We've talked about that, but maybe a bigger concern for those of you in the Tampa Bay area and just south is going to be the storm surge and the wind impacts. It is time where we may want to start considering a plan here, an emergency plan to evacuate. I do think that we are going to see hurricane and storm surge watches issued perhaps as soon as early Monday morning. So we've got about a day and a half before that's going to happen. And here you can see the likeliest time for winds to make their way into Florida is going to be later Tuesday night and then into central Florida by the time we get to Wednesday morning. And yeah, we're going to have to keep an eye on this up the coast of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. It's not going into the mountains, though. We don't have that track, but we may see some stronger winds on the north central Gulf Coast, the northeast Gulf Coast for sure, and maybe the Atlantic coast as well. And in South Florida, including the Florida Keys, you are still within this potential window, even though right now the track is north of you. This is the SHIPS model, and it is predicting that we are at a pretty decent chance of this strengthening quickly in the next 24 hours. But looking at the big picture, there is more than a 1 in 3 chance that this system is going to strengthen by 65 knots or more. And that is about 7 times the climatological average. That puts us at Category 3 intensity, as our storm would be pushing close to 100 knots at that point, which is 115 miles per hour, Category 3. So the SHIPS model says there's a 1 in 3 chance or greater that this is going to be a Category 3. And obviously, there's a good setup for this to occur. The wind shear stays low, 10 knots or less. Sea surface temperatures are at 90 degrees almost, dropping to 88, still very high. They don't come down until the system makes landfall. Very moist environment over the next 24 hours. I think this is what's going to help our core really get going. 80% relative humidity, up at about 15 to 20,000 feet, and significant amount of ocean heat content that really stays high as the system is moving all the way to Florida. The only thing that's going to keep this from really bombing out might be internal structure changes, like an eye wall replacement, which would weaken the strongest wind, but also make the storm larger. And that is something that's very difficult to predict at this point. Here is a look at where the models are taking it, and we have strong agreement for the majority of our models that show this becoming a hurricane that it's going to make landfall somewhere between Bradenton and just north of Clearwater, which includes the Bay Area. The tracks that are farther north are going to be more devastating for Tampa than the ones farther south, but nonetheless, they all take it across central Florida. These models down here are not predicting the system to strengthen much, and as a result, I think they're going to be too far to the south. Intensity forecast. Well, you can see right here that more than half of our models are at least at Category 2 intensity by the time we get into Monday night. We have several that go Category 3 or 4, and as you all know, these models do a pretty decent job, but sometimes they end up being a little bit too low, depending on what happens with the core of our storm. Wind shear forecast. This is something we need to watch closely. So you can see the storm here over the southern Gulf is heading into an area where the wind shear is actually going to be fairly low. The strong wind shear, and I'm sorry if my pen conflicts with this, the strong wind shear stays north of Tampa Bay, but there's one thing I want to point out to you all, and that's the area where the low wind shear is bounded by the high wind shear is often an area that actually can help storms get bigger and intensify more. And the reason why is that a hurricane will be, as it grows, will have a chance to be what we call ventilated, and it allows the outflow to grow. When those winds are stronger up at the upper levels of the atmosphere, they actually give the hurricane a little bit of injection and allow it to grow more in size and allow it to spread more on the northward side. We saw that with Helene, where the wind shear, as the storm was making its final approach to the Big Bend, actually strengthened despite the increasing wind shear. It didn't weaken until it came onshore or near the time it made landfall. And this system has somewhat of a similar setup to that, despite the different track that it'll be taking than Helene. It's not coming north, but instead moving east-northeastward. The wind shear remains low through Tuesday. And then finally, as the storm approaches Tampa Bay, it starts to move into an area of higher wind shear. But I will say this, if the storm is quicker than the wind shear, it can be stronger. If it's slower than the wind shear, it may not be as strong. But right now, we need to be prepared for a stronger system. As it moves into the Atlantic, it is something we'll have to watch in the northern Bahamas and Bermuda. But by then, I think the wind shear ends up being too strong. And it's unlikely this system is going to directly hit Bermuda as a hurricane. It could be a tropical storm. It could even fizzle at that point. So we're going to look at models real fast. Here's the GFS continuing to be very aggressive with a powerful Category 3 or 4 hurricane that makes landfall Wednesday morning to midday in the northern portion of Pinellas County, which is worst case scenario for Tampa Bay. It is not just showing this now. You'll notice here that it was showing the same thing with the run earlier today. It was showing the same thing with the run last night. And that's when we started catching on to things. It was last night. Before then, we didn't have that. So GFS has been consistent, 3 runs in a row. The European is not as strong. It's a little farther south as a result, but the European traditionally has been too weak with these sort of storms. But it does have a hurricane heading towards the Port Charlotte area. The European AI also has a hurricane in the same area as the European operational. The ICON model, this one is starting to pick up a stronger storm. You see the pressures drop. This is a Category 2 by Tuesday, and showing a Category 2 coming into the Port Charlotte area. So the weaker the system, the farther south it may go. But again, the ICON and the GFS have been at odds all season, and the GFS has done a better job. And that's the one I'm going to put my trust in at this point. Navy GEM model, not the best hurricane model, but you can see it's got a hurricane hitting just north of Tampa Bay, probably a Category 2. It is faster. It's got it happening Tuesday night. I think that's probably a little bit too fast. Here's a look at the Canadian model, which is slower, but is strong. In fact, it delays this landfall in Florida until probably on Friday, which I think is too late. This is an outlier, but if it's slower, it's more of a rain problem than a wind problem. Now let's look at the tropical models. These are starting to do a better job in picking up on our storm now that it's forming. And you can see by tomorrow afternoon, we may be approaching hurricane strength on this model, and it continues to deepen quickly. And this may end up being too strong. I think 922 millibars is probably way too aggressive, but that is pushing Category 5 strength. And I'm not predicting that at this point. I think 4 might be a better forecast, but it keeps it up at that level and then weakens it slightly on Wednesday to a Category 4. And then as the storm approaches Tampa, it is weakening some, but this is a worst case scenario for Tampa Bay. And the reason why is as this storm goes by in this direction, all of the storm surge, all the high winds go right up into the bay. This is bad as well south of Tampa Bay, by the way. It's not as bad for Steinhatchee and Cedar Key, but it is still going to produce some strong wind, as you can see here in those areas. So obviously a very concerning forecast model. Beyond this time frame, you'll see it weakens slowly as it moves just north and west of the Orlando area, and then should be moving offshore the Space Coast by the time we get to Thursday morning. It's not the only run showing that. This is the HMON Tropical, similar setup here. We're down into the 920s, high-end Category 4 storm, then coming up in intensity or pressure a little bit, and then another deepening. So this, again, shows a very powerful storm hitting almost in the exact same spot as a Category 4, but this time frame is going to be later on Wednesday evening. So it's about 6 to 12 hours behind the HWRF. The HAVS model, another good tropical model that did pretty well with Helene, shows a similar setup here. It's not quite as strong as the two I just showed you, but it is very strong. This is high-end Category 4 for Tuesday night. And as we get into Wednesday, it is showing some dry air getting in there and some weakening, which would drop this to a Category 3 or maybe a high-end Category 2. I'm predicting Category 3 because I think this is on to something. But I would prepare for a 4 anyway. But again, same exact spot here, northern Pinellas County, coming by near the north side of Orlando, weakening significantly, and then moving and growing over the waters of the Atlantic, staying off of the Carolina coast, but close enough to provide you with some higher surge. So yeah, nasty storm for sure if this forecast holds. Rainfall forecast, this is a blend, and it's going to be pretty wet here, potentially over 6 inches when this storm comes in. I would not be shocked to see over a foot. East Coast as well, going up I-4. Even Jacksonville could see significant rain. Ocala as well, Gainesville. South Florida, you're going to get all the moisture. You may have some severe weather to deal with as well. And then here's the GFS model, which shows you where the track takes the heaviest rain on the western side of it. I would not go off of any one model here. You can see there's heavy potential for a foot of rain or more, depending on where the storm goes, but it is speeding along more quickly. Wind speeds. This is a big concern for us here in Florida. You can see where the potential track takes the wind here, right across the I-4 corridor, and the potential for strong winds even towards Fernandina Beach and towards Daytona and Flagler County, and less wind for South Florida unless this ends up being too far north, and this could still change. Over time, you'll see it's going to be breezy on the coast, but I don't think we're going to see a direct impact. Here's a look at these wind speeds. These are gusts for the Florida area. You can see Wednesday morning, gusts over 100 miles per hour in Tampa and 106 in St. Pete, which would be pretty much unheard of if this is correct for that area. Potentially 80 mile per hour winds in the Orlando area, 90 to 100 in Lakeland, even Bradenton, Sarasota, potentially hurricane conditions. Where Hurricane Ian hit a little less, but if this shifts south, you obviously have to be very, very mindful of that. And the timeline for this wind is going to be late Tuesday night and Wednesday, later in Wednesday's day and at night for the East Coast. Here's a HAVS model, and same kind of scenario here, wind speeds getting over 100 miles per hour around the Bay Area potentially, and offshore even stronger than that. This has a farther north track, which brings those strong winds up towards Ocala, Gainesville, and Jacksonville, and lighter wind on the south side of our storm, but strong winds for the Space Coast Wednesday afternoon. So something to keep in mind here, but we may have, because of the front that approaches, a pretty good backlash from this system here on the northeast coast of Florida on Wednesday night. The worst storms that have ever hit Tampa have taken a similar path. This is the end of September 1848. Nobody was around for that, but that was the benchmark storm for Tampa. This is from Storm Team 8. Don't want to steal your graphic, but just wanted to show it. 1921, this was late October, and the storm went over the same part of the Gulf, although it originated in the Caribbean, and hit Tampa as a strong storm with winds of 100 miles per hour. Those are the two benchmark storms for Tampa and the ones we need to be potentially gauging this on. All right, real quick, Eastern Atlantic, Kirk is down to Category 3. Leslie is now up to Category 1. We have another area we need to watch behind it. You can see here with Kirk, it will lose its tropical characteristics Monday afternoon, evening. The remains will head into western France and maybe southern England and through Belgium and Netherlands. It'll move quickly, but we will have some significant wind and rain here along the Atlantic coast. Here's a look at Kirk. And you can see still a powerful storm, but it is getting some wind shear and some slightly cooler water, which has allowed it to start to weaken. Winds are 120 miles per hour. And continuing that weakening trend here over the weekend down to Category 1 by Monday, and a post-tropical storm system Monday, Tuesday into Wednesday. So that's Kirk. Here's Leslie, and you can see there is wind shear, but Leslie's got a decent little core right now, 80 mile per hour storm. It is no longer expected, let me refresh that because that's wrong, no longer expected to be a stronger storm, a Category 2 or 3. More than likely it's reaching its peak now, and will actually weaken some back to a tropical storm despite the warm water. And let me refresh this for you, and you can see very little support for this to go west. More than likely it turns to the north and east and then weakens. And you can see the wind shear is going to pick up, and that's a large reason this storm will be weakening. So here's a look at the GFS real quick. You see Kirk moving away, the remains of Helene, not a threat. And then here's Leslie. This is this weekend. Leslie weakens. Here is where potentially our next storm, Milton, would track. And again, a little bit uncertain at this point, and then maybe we get Nadine out here briefly later this week, likely not to be a threat to land at that point. We're going to have to keep an eye on the Central Atlantic beyond that, but right now, no threats to land. Here's the European model, and real quick, you will see it no longer shows a powerful storm here with Leslie. In fact, it's not super aggressive with the next one. It just has a lower end system, which could be Nadine. And you can see here, because of the wind shear in the front approaching, future Milton here is probably going to be a much weaker system when it gets closer to Bermuda on Friday, and then may just merge with a front over the weekend. It may be something we still need to watch, but at this point, I'm not super concerned about it. Elsewhere in the Pacific, quieting down in the Western Pacific. We do have something to watch, though, off to the northeast of Guam and the Mariana Islands, not strengthening at this point. And then we have a potential disturbance in a few days that's going to track away from the Mexican coast, but we'll have to keep an eye if we're in Cabo for that. So, ironically, Milton replaced Michael from 6 years ago, and it's, again, headed towards Florida, almost the exact date, 6 years later. I'm going to be watching this for you all closely. I really think this is going to be a dangerous storm. I'm not going to go out here like this to try to scare people if I don't think that there's a reason this isn't going to be a dangerous storm. So we're going to watch it closely for you all this weekend, but I appreciate your time today. Please be safe. If you're in Florida, please take this seriously and start your preparation now. Don't wait until Tuesday. It's going to be too late at that point. As always, I appreciate your time today, and I thank you, and you all mean the world to me. But no one is greater than my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I give him all the glory for everything. This is my assignment from him. It is to help save lives. And he is a wonderful God. And Jesus died for our sins so that we can live eternally if we choose to believe that. Revelation 21, an angel said, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.' He said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death.'" And that's grim, but the good part is things are done, and to those who are victorious, those who accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior, are going to inherit that. And I don't want to take a chance, and I didn't want to take a chance and go the other route. You may, but I pray that you don't. And I just wanted to share the encouragement that there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain in heaven with Jesus, because the old order of things that we have here on earth will have passed away. I am making everything new. The Lord can renew you and give you the strength and courage to be a child of God and to live eternally with him. But you have to make that choice. And I urge you to make that choice, because it is something that you're not going to have a choice later to do. It's now or never. You don't know when the world's going to end. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. So I encourage you to make that choice. So I hope you all have a great Saturday, and I'll be back tomorrow. God bless you.